So Peter, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here. I'm glad to see you.
It's wonderful. So I have to say, every Dreamforce this was my 10th Dreamforce, where I've come up every morning at the kickoff, seen inspiration from you, and have never looked back. And I look forward to that every year. Not only the morning piece, but what you do throughout to make it happen and teach us the way we teach us. To appreciate you do that.
I'm coming up on 13 years at Salesforce. When I joined the company, I thought it might be an interesting 5-year gig. And every 2 years I say, oh, well, now we can finally get started. And as long as I keep feeling like every 2 years is a chance to really get started, I don't know when I would stop doing this.
Well, we hope that you never do.
Thank you.
So tell us, what was new about this Dreamforce that you thought, especially from the announcements and, Salesforce obviously is a pioneer in the customer space.
Yes.
Where do you think the space is headed, and what do you think Salesforce's role is going forward?
Well, it's kind of obvious that a major new element of Dreamforce this year was the presence of Tableau on stage and the opportunity to talk about that acquisition. And the degree to which there's a 1 + 1 = 3 relationship, where Einstein Analytics is about making power accessible and Tableau dramatically expands the portfolio of powerful analytic tools available to our customers, is the chance to take these tsunamis of data that are arising from an Internet of Things and from mobile devices and start to find actionable insight that is accessible not just to the analytics or statistics professional, but to line of business people who just want to know what's the next best action, the next best offer, what's the action I should take. And I actually did an internal essay saying, if only we could redefine customer relationship management, because a relationship is kind of a static idea, to customer action management, because what people really want to know is, what's the next thing I should do to delight my customer, to differentiate my offering, to resist the pressures of commoditization that are such a challenge for people in every sector today.
That's a very interesting piece you put up because I believe that depending on the culture you belong to,
yes,
the action or the offer is very different and it's very relative.
And that's a matter that requires the sensitivity. We have an internal comment recently by one of our senior managers that among the challenges for Salesforce is to embrace the challenge of being a global company, not a San Francisco company with branch offices, and to deliver the appropriate kind of engagement that's culturally sensitive, that's sensitive to a 5-generation workplace where there are different norms of what constitutes appropriate levels of service and the nature of interaction. This is something where we have to become ever more sophisticated in these areas.
So the experiential side of where things are headed, eventually, like Mark always says as well, and you say it too, behind every interaction, behind every technology, there's a human at the end, of the customer for this matter, that is consuming this information as well.
Yes.
How well do you think the innovators, which would be all of us, understand what is needed by the collective intellects of humans that are being evolved out of the next generation technologies, and how are we getting them ready for this revolution?
There's a dangerously attractive direction where the water flows downhill for people with a great idea to fall in love with their idea, with their invention. Dan DeBell, when he was with us, said, if you fall in love with your solution, you may have one success. If you fall in love with the problem you solve and the need you meet, you can have an endless string of successes, because that way you're always open to the possibility of a radically new way of solving that problem. And Peter Drucker famously said, it only becomes an innovation when an invention achieves adoption. And so understanding why people aren't adopting your brilliant idea is not a distraction, it's the job. And understanding what norm am I violating, what hidden assumption are they making that I have failed to refute. Getting inside the head of the customer isn't an irritating obstacle, it's the essence of being a successful innovator. And so the more you can do that measures people's behavior and infers their intentions and their desires, the more likely you are to achieve the outcome of innovation, which is behavior change.
So I think if you look at the social platforms, they're doing a fine job of learning the human pieces that you just mentioned as well. The enterprise software space, or the enterprise space in general, seems to be lacking behind. What do you think is the reason for that?
Well, I'll begin by challenging your suggestion that the social media platforms are doing that, because what the social media platforms are doing is understanding their user enough to make them addictive and increase the amount of eyeball time they collect. Social media platforms don't exist to make their users happy. They exist to keep their users engaged and keep their eyeballs on the platform. And to that extent, the user is the product in those situations. At Salesforce, our customers and the outcomes that they achieve with their customers, those are the product. And that's why we have to charge for our services instead of giving them away, because the customer isn't the product, the outcome is the product. That's an important distinction.
So understood that the customer's a product. You're not paying for it. And in the case of enterprise software, you are.
Yes.
But the adoption piece and the stickiness is the same across even in the enterprise space, especially a subscription model where the renewal is more important than even the selling at that point of as well.
Well, the renewal is the outcome. That's right. That's a good point. And among the reasons that Mark founded Salesforce in the first place, Mark Benioff, was his observation that somehow things like Google and eBay and Amazon achieved adoption by people who'd never taken a class in how to use them, who didn't get angry when those things improved, even though that meant they had changed, but instead embraced the opportunity to learn the new capability, while enterprise software seemed stuck in a time warp where it was 1960 and time was running at a slower pace because every change required training costs. And he said, what is the difference? And so Salesforce has always been designed to achieve discoverability and an ease of use that leads to superior levels of engagement.
And I think the engagement levels are even at a faster, especially if you look at what Mark and Tim Cook talked about, and other features around that as well. Talk about what do you think about that?
What I often point out is that fiction shows us what we wish we could have if we didn't know the technology enough to know what wasn't possible. And so when Tony Stark in an Iron Man movie walks into his house, he doesn't walk over to the wall and start tapping out icons on a touchscreen. He talks to the house and the house talks back. Right. And the average app that's downloaded onto a phone in the United States today is used 1.1 times before people encounter its limitations or its difficulties. And the next thing, the most used feature on any app is to scroll as far down the menus as you need until you find the Contact Us button, and then find an actual telephone number where you can talk to a human being. So moving to a conversational interface as opposed to an app-type interface is a high priority. It's how people prefer to engage. And instead of dozens and dozens of apps on your phone, one conversational channel in which all of your service providers seem to somehow manage to come to you. Alexa things are not called apps, they're called skills. And continuously expanding the portfolio of skills that your personal assistant provides, that's the new model, as opposed to there's an app for that. The ability to understand spoken language without training to a specific speaker was thought to be tremendously difficult until we realized that if you know the domain in which the conversation is taking place, if you're doing air traffic control or if you're ordering meals and so on, Roger Schenck called it the frame problem. If I know that you're in a restaurant, then certain words mean certain things. If I know that you're at home or if I know you're in a car, it can dramatically shrink the domain of possible meanings of a phrase. And this is how we simulate genuine understanding of natural language, by knowing enough about the context that we can narrow the possible range of possible meanings. And so conversation requires context, and now mobile devices give us tremendous amounts of contextual information because we know who it is that's on the device. We have a good idea of where they are, where they've been, where they're going. If we are allowed to see calendar information and other behavioral data, we can get a tremendous amount of guidance as to what out of a universe of possibilities is the actual thing they're trying to get done. This is why conversational interfaces that have been a toy and a stupid tech trick and a distraction for literally decades are suddenly now coming into their own, because the combination of mobility and connectivity gives us that context that disambiguates people's intentions.
So why is phone a dependency still, or will a phone stay a dependency? Because that interface can go in your car and your anything, IoT part.
The phone is what I call the flashlight era of connection. Imagine if every time you walked into a room you weren't sure there'd be a light switch, so you had to carry a flashlight everywhere. When you walk into places and you can't be sure there'll be connectivity, you have to carry a phone with you everywhere. but eventually, and I mean in small single-digit years, you'll be able to expect that you can walk into a room. It will detect from a very small token of identity that you carry on you. This is an idea I stole from Scott McNeely when he was still at Sun. All you really need to do is carry an identity, an identity token, and the environment, once it knows who you are, will proactively serve up the information that you need and the menu of actions you might plausibly want to be taking. And this is a direction that we're going in very rapidly. Some of this work was presaged at Xerox PARC under the term of ubiquitous computing, and that's no longer a fantasy notion. We can achieve that in many environments today.
So, Peter, one last question.
Yeah.
Kids that are born between 2010 and 2025 are called Generation Alpha.
Yes.
This is the first generation that is going to be born into AI.
Okay.
And essentially, if you look at what AI or machine learning is termed at, it's about a 6 to 7 year old child,
Sure.
which makes these kids and AI pretty much the same. They're going together. The question I have for you is, the generation you and I come from, and maybe before, had the ability to have original thought, where you could, make your own forms and so forth.
Yes.
Some of that has been taken away by the likes of Amazon and the Netflixes of the world as well. And with these kids, they're going to have intelligent toys to play with as well. What do you see happening in terms of evolution dynamic between man and machine, and how do you think these kids differ from us?
Well, since I have grandchildren of my own, this is a subject of deep personal interest for me. And the way I look at it is this: the kind of creativity that will be available to them will be the kind to say, I wonder what would happen if pi were 3. I wonder what would happen if friction behaved differently. They'll be able to conjure up simulations and explore alternative realities with a degree of mathematical rigor combined with artistic creativity that was really not available before. To say that it's going to constrain their creativity is going to say that the things we used to call creative efforts will now be much easier to do, and to be worried that means they won't develop creativity. But on the other hand, the kinds of creativity they'll be able to explore in areas like becoming composers of music and creators of elaborate visual arts will now be available to children in grade school. And this is the actual dynamic I'm observing with my own grandchildren. It's not constraining their creativity. They're doing things now at the age of, 7 that I didn't hope to have a chance to do in school until I was, twice that age. And that's why I'm quite optimistic rather than pessimistic about the future of creativity in a machine intelligence world.
Well, this is going to definitely produce some interesting humans going forward as well. Peter, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you for being with us.
You bet. Great to see you, Janelle.
All right, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.